Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com, and we've got a very special episode of what used to be called the MMA Tete-a-Tete, and now I'm going to call It's Just Business. We're going to talk about the UFC and MMA's business, the ugly business of combat sports. We've got Brian D'Souza and John Nash here to talk about, among other things, the UFC lawsuits, or the lawsuits against Zuffa and the UFC, and their counterclaims, as well as the exceptionally almost suspiciously good January they just wrapped up. They had two massive pay-per-views. They had excellent ratings on Fox Sports 1, record-breaking ratings. Why did they put that together, John? What's the incentive for the UFC to be on their best, most revenue-generating behavior right now?
Well, I mean, besides the fact they like to make as much money as possible because their business, there's something specific coming up towards the middle of the year. They have in their term loan, their $525 million term loan they have outstanding, they have a covenant, and the covenant says that their EBITDA is below or more than five times their total debt. They have limits.
EBITDA is kind of like cash flow, or what is this magic?
Yeah, basically, especially with the LLC, it's basically their cash flow. The money's coming through. It's all the money that's coming through. I guess the only thing you take out is the insurance payment, and the rest is cash flow that's available to them. So that's their net cash. So they need that kind of money. If five times, I mean, they have to have, let's say, $100 million of profit, pre-tax profit available. If they don't make that kind of money, the covenants kick in, and one thing is when the loan comes up, they've failed to meet their covenant, the loan terms change. They might have to end up spending more on that loan and have trouble taking more money out. The other problem is if they don't meet that, they can't take money out of the company. There's rules, so they'll only be allowed to take out what would pay their taxes, which is much less than the money made. So that's money, sitting there that they would like to take out. And I'm sure they've made promises to Flash that there's a certain amount of money they'll pay them every year.
Flash being the 10% owners, the Middle Eastern country.
So,
which country is it?
It's United Arab Emirates, which is a huge, very high standard in labor.
Now, is it the UAE, or is it just the Abu Dhabi subset of the UAE?
Abu Dhabi subset, but I think Flash is owned by several sheiks in the UAE. I'm not sure. I haven't seen their. But so last year, as everybody knows, they had a terrible year pay-per-view wise. Revenue, profits were down 40%. Their earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization was supposedly ratio was on the high five, so 5.8. So they had to make a lot of money this last quarter if they want to bring it down to 5 times. And which is very conveniently, they had some very big title fights in January. Not title fights, but very big fights that thankfully some drug testing didn't capture until after the fight. They're still able
that was pretty convenient, wasn't it?
Very well. I like to push this because I want the conspiracy to run wild, but I don't know if I believe the conspiracy, but damn, is it
always, Occam's razor works to me such that always go with incompetence over plot. Like blame stupidity, not evil, generally. But it sure is convenient that Nevada gets their money and the UFC gets their money, and the fights happen, but then the fighters lose some of their purse. So it's like a double win. Like you get to have the fight and you get to pay the guys less. Hey, when do we want to reveal these?
And I'm sure, Nevada is like, our biggest client, Zuffa, UFC gets to come back again and again. So it's a win-win for all. The fans won. We got to see the fights.
I see. And Brian, how do you rate the UFC's January campaign? Is this a one-off, or have they got the mojo back and it's just going to be one of the great years in UFC?
Nate, I want to be optimistic. Looking at new star like Conor McGregor. Anderson Silva's come back. John Jones just smashing it, racking up these defenses. I want to be optimistic and say we're going to get some momentum going, but the cards are still stretched thin, and there's a lot of resentment about just even fighting for the UFC, and we're going to see probably more contract wrangling throughout the year. And have they really replaced their stars? Is Cain Velasquez or Anthony Pettis or any of these guys really going to come in and attain BJ Penn levels? I don't know. I don't believe it'll happen. We'll see if Ronda Rousey can headline a card by herself and pull in a really nice number, and it's touch and go at this point.
That's going to be a brutal test, especially with Holly Holm is now the co-main event. I mean, this was a card that at one time was going to have Frank Mir and Bigfoot Silva and Chris Weidman, obviously, and Vitor Belfort, and all these big stars, plus Ronda Rousey. And now it's going to be Ronda Rousey backed by Holly Holm that nobody really knows, making a UFC debut. I mean, she's got potential. Now, I think they could market her long term as a exciting challenger to Ronda. But we've never seen women's MMA. We know it draws ratings on free TV. It's never really been tested as the solo headliner for a major pay-per-view. So it's going to be very interesting. And then the rest of the month, I mean, my God, they just fall off the table after this killer January. Let me pull up what's coming down the pipe. I mean, we were supposed to have Weidman versus Belfort at UFC 184, but now we're looking at Henderson versus Thatch, another late-minute substitute. Vincent Henderson stepping up on Valentine's Day. Bigfoot versus Mir. Rousey versus Ngannou instead of Weidman versus Belfort. Pettis versus Dos Anjos. So UFC 185 should be medium strong if Anthony Pettis can get anything going. But then, Maia versus LaFleur. Who? What? Mendez versus Lamas, Gonzaga versus Crow Cop 2. It's just back to the butters being spread as thinly as possible. But meanwhile, the UFC is getting hit with more and more lawsuits. Just today, Mac Danzig and Gabe Rudiger, kind of unlikely suit mates, filed a lawsuit. Is this part of the same organized effort, John, of lawsuits that were filed originally by Kung Lee and John Fitch and not Carlos Newton? Who was the third one?
Quarry.
Nate Quarry.
Yeah.
And then we had Brandon Vera and Pablo Garza filed the third suit, and then Dennis Hallman and Javier Vasquez joined in. So is this part of that same family of lawsuits?
I think it is now. I'm not sure it originally was. The interesting thing is a new firm. Now, off the top of my head, I just suddenly can't remember the firm name, the new firm. But a new firm out of Philadelphia, another major antitrust firm, is signed on, and the only other firm on that new complaint.
Let's see. The new firm was Spector, Roseman, Kodroff, and Willis.
Yeah, Spector, Roseman, Kodroff. So they've won major cases. They're in Philly. They've won. You look, they have like $1 billion settlements. They're another one of the major, and they're specialized in antitrust class action.
Proverbial Philadelphia lawyer.
Yeah. So they're on it. It's a new firm. That's interesting. And the only other of the previous firms is Joseph Savary. So I don't know if this is someone they brought in, that firm, or if someone that tried to push their way in and then at the last minute they signed on with them. But the complaint's almost identical. They copy and pasted the information. So it's going to be folded into the other one no matter what.
I see. And then just recently the UFC, Zuffa, filed a motion to move the venue from, it's currently in San Jose, the home of Strikeforce and the home of Kung Lee. They want to move the venue to Nevada. And why would you want to do that? Just convenience, just a shorter drive down to the courthouse?
Well, that's partly, save money, everything's there. But I think the bigger reason is NorCal is very famous for being very pro-plaintiff when it comes to class action lawsuits, and they have a track record of really finding in favor of especially athletes. The MLB, NCAA, NFL all had major class actions tried there, and all were decided in favor of the athletes. So they're, I'm sure the UFC is looking at that and go, we want to get out of that court district.
And so who gets to decide whether or not it gets bumped back to Nevada or not? Is that going to be a North California judge that decides to give this case away? Or?
The Northern California, one of their judges will decide.
I see.
A federal judge. So I'm thinking they're going to want to, it's 50. I've talked to a lot of people, and they think it's about 50-50. It could go either way. There's a strong argument to move it to Nevada, but at the same time, there's... And
that's partly because there's clauses in the contracts that say any disputes will be adjudicated in Nevada. Is that the deal?
I don't think those will enter because those are specifically about contract disputes. This is a class action, so I don't think the ones that are in the contracts to the UFC are going to matter. But like they mentioned in their filing is that all the major players are in Nevada, but what's going for San Jose is some of the plaintiffs are from there, some of the the past history took place there, and they do have experience handling antitrust class action suits of this nature. So they might say, hey, we have much more experience handling this. We're much more familiar with it. Let's do it here instead of Nevada. So right now I get about a 50-50 flip. But it's, it'll play down the line whenever it gets to settlement or something. Whatever's.
But there's a little bit of history of lawsuits against Zuffa happening in Nevada with Ken Shamrock's lawsuit against the UFC, which ended up with Ken Shamrock basically being reduced to penury. I mean, they took him he sued them. and he owes them money basically forever.
Yeah. They have a clause that if you lose a suit, but this is of course an individual suit, but if you lose a suit you bring against the UFC, you're liable for the damages. So it doesn't matter if it was frivolous or not, doesn't matter how legitimate your complaint is. If you lose to them in Nevada in a regular suit, then you're liable for the damages. But I don't think the Zuffa threatened that, their UFC's lawyers threatened that in their letter, that they're going to try to do it, but I don't think talking to some experts, I don't think that'll work in this case. But, the other thing great, when you're in Nevada going against them is you have to deal with judges that openly write thank you letters to the Fertittas for sponsoring, donating to their campaigns. I'm sure they're impartial.
I'm not going to say bought and paid for judges, but I will say donated and supported.
Yeah. I will stop my sentence at that point.
Yes, and so the other case that comes to mind is Mark Cuban. When he was looking into promoting some big fights, he was looking into getting involved in a potential Randy Couture versus Fedor Emelianenko fight. He had a lawsuit against Zuffa, or maybe they sued him. Somebody was suing somebody, and when it got moved to Nevada, Mark Cuban threw in the towel, bought some Zuffa bonds, and made friends, and that was that.
Yep, that was it was actually Zuffa sued Randy Couture and HDNet twice. They sued him the first time for breaking his contract for broadcaster. That was the first one to freeze up. And then the second one, they were Randy had sued originally to say that in Texas that his contract was void because it wasn't a legal contract, and that's the one they moved to Nevada. And when that happened, they thought it would drag it out. And, who wants to sit in court and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for years of your career?
Exactly, and then potentially owe all the legal fees.
Yes.
At the end of it. So Mark Cuban, a smart businessman, decided the discretion was a better part of valor. And Brian, what is the deal with all these fighters signing up for these lawsuits? And it seems like there's also a coterie of fighters who are suddenly re-signing with Zuffa. Like, are there deals being cut and phone calls being made constantly? What are you hearing on the back channel pipelines? I mean, where's a good MMA manager advise his clients to do, especially if they're on the back end of their career?
Ooh, it's a tough question. You're talking about Randy Couture, and he knew he didn't have that many years left. But if he'd stuck it out, he could have seen what would have happened. Everyone thinks it was a clear-cut case where he had to adhere to his contract, but there's more negotiation than people think. The main thing that has always been on Zuffa's side is time and the opportunities they can dole out. So if you're a commentator, you're a guy like Cormier or Kenny Florian, are you going to join the suit? It doesn't make any sense because it's trading a bird in the hand. Whereas Frank Trigg at least knows that he could get a commentating job, and he said he wouldn't join the suit. But that's the genius of Zuffa. You don't have to give everyone an opportunity. You just have to promise it. And then it's controlling guys that way. So a lot of the main...
I wanted to bring up, this is a guy who's a former UFC fighter, former Pride fighter also, and also a commentator, kind of on the periphery, had some domestic violence troubles that are probably going to keep him from any big-time commentating opportunities. But he comes out and says these sort of things. Fighters sign their deals, they're responsible. I mean, very much came out with sort of a pro-Zuffa statement. And yeah, that was the first thing that came to my mind is Frank still angling and hoping that there's a commentating job for old Frank somewhere.
Yeah, that's
all fighters are like that. They always think they're going to get one more shot, one more title shot, one big fight in. Now that with so many big fight names have dried up, Crow Cop is back, Mark Hunt is in the title mix at heavyweight. Who's to blame them for thinking like, well, maybe something good will come to me if I keep my mouth shut?
And I'll say this. I was just going to say, I don't think people think like an active fighter is going to sign on, and I've talked to a lot of fighters the last 9 months, I guess, when I was looking into this, and almost all of them, a lot of them support it. I'd say of all the fighters I talked, probably half, are pro, or let's say 40% are pro, 40% haven't made up their mind, and 20% are against it. So it tilts in favor of being pro suit, but no one active on the roster is going to sign on. They all think they're throwing their career away, their active career if they sign on. The only people going to sign on are ex-fighters.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing so far. Because for one thing, there's not only the stick of killing your career that Zuffa has, they also have lots of carrots. Hey, we can, wouldn't you like to have Chuck Liddell's job or whatever that is?
Oh yeah. And there were fighter names that I had heard that were supposedly attached to the suit that were that were active or whatever in the UFC, and before they filed, I noticed they all got signed new contracts with the UFC or extensions or something. And I don't know if it's true that I'm not saying that they intentionally went after them, but I just know those names were attached to the suit that I'd heard before, and by the time the suit came out, they were happy campers.
And before we talk about the merits of the case, such that we have any insight into that, we're not lawyers, so don't take your legal advice here. But what is the sheer sort of power calculation here? Who are some of these firms, and what's their angle, and what's their business model here? Are the fighters paying for this, or are the firms waiting for a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? How's this work?
Which one? Me or?
What's the business model? How does this work?
Who are you directing the question at?
Two of these lawyers, are they scary lawyers?
Ask John. He's on top of this shit.
They are. I mean, everybody. The UFC's lawyers are the best lawyers in the business right now. They hired Boyce Schiller. The guys I've talked to.
And David Boyce is the guy who sued Microsoft for antitrust or led the government's case against him. I mean, this is a big time lawyer.
Huge. You don't get bigger than this. The only the biggest, they're spending a truckload on them, on those guys. The firms representing the plaintiffs, though, these are major firms too. I've talked to several professors and antitrust lawyers and class action lawyers, and when I mention the names of the plaintiffs, they're taken back too. Right there they say this is a serious case just because who's attached. These are firms that specifically pick out only a few cases a year that they're going to try, and they pick out the ones that they think they're going to make big bucks on. And so they're financing it. The fighters aren't going to lose any money. The fighters aren't putting up any money on it. These firms are going to put up millions upon millions of dollars to try this case. At least they're willing to try this case, and at the end they expect a very large sum to pay the very large salaries that these guys expect.
And so, do you think there's a chance that Zuffa will divide and conquer with all these law firms? I mean, would you expect some of these suits to start settling? Like, what would be a sign? What are some things to watch for as far as the progress of the suit? The first one, obviously, is the motion as to where the venue is. Yeah. But let's say it stays in Northern California. What's Zuffa's best game plan there? Start settling with some of these firms and fighters?
Well, you can't. They're probably going to courts are going to merge them, and you can't just. I think it was Don Fry said all these fighters are just going to get paid off and walk away, and they can't really do that. They have a fiduciary responsibility to the class as the suit.
The class action suit, that means anybody affected by what they are calling monopolistic practices by Zuffa, and it's not just fighters. It's also apparel makers, even members of the MMA media were invited to participate in this, which
no, it's limited to fighters. I think the future it's limited to fighters right now that have fought in the UFC, and there's certain they've narrowed the class, but in the future people think if this makes progress that others, apparel, stadiums, other promoters, MMA media, if this goes forward,
so Scala Shaw could finally get justice. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Scala. There's all those poor egregious fellows that, especially in the media, us media members that didn't get credentialed. Well.
It's sort of Brian. I mean, what are you hearing like in the manager world? Like, do they think these guys are crazy? Do they think this has been a long time coming? This is overdue? Or are people like watching this like, I'm not going to get involved, but I hope they win? Or are they like, what is there a split, or what are you hearing?
I would think that I don't want to get involved. I don't want to stick my neck out there. But if this results in a better negotiating position or more leverage for me, I'm going to take it, because that's some money I could get today. As it is, there's people with their business intertwined with Zuffa, like Ed Soros, who has the RFA. Like he's not necessarily, he would never go up against Zuffa or want to be seen as providing any resistance. But this would, if the suit, even if they settle, it's still going to help the fighters. They might get their likeness rights back or other routes to revenue, or the contracts could be revised. In a boxing contract with HBO or Showtime, those purses are guaranteed. So when they sign like a long-term deal, they have to pay them that money. Whereas here, it's like completely one-sided, which is something a lot of people are missing. There's no security whatsoever. And then
any time off a loss, and there's no guarantee you'll get the fights that your contract promises.
The problem with managers is that most of them have had to be like a little bit of Stockholm syndrome just to survive, just to get opportunities, because the title, there's no rankings in MMA. You can't hold the title hostage. You can't get to a title unless Dana White and the Fertittas say it's okay. It doesn't matter how good you are,
I mean, there are rankings the UFC does themselves.
Yeah. It's an arbitrary system, right? It's like feudal times, and if you're not tight with the mafia lord or the king, however you want to call it, you
Well, we
won't
can't
get
use the
in.
term mafia lord in any way, shape, or form. There's certainly nothing resembling mafia in any way involved in the fight game. I mean,
Okay, but I'll tell you this
obviously.
much: the spark plug behind the whole lawsuit is Rob Macy, who tried to organize a mixed martial arts fighters
And this is just a
association.
troublemaker coming out of nowhere, right? This is a lawyer who became a fan, who read some stories about fighters, and his heart started bleeding, and he was crying and hugging trees, and now he's trying to solve the world's problems and costs the Fertitas a lot of money. Is that the deal?
Yeah, and one story that he told me a while back, which I can share, is he talked to the major camps like AKA and Ed Soares, who had all the champions. He's like, all right, you got all the champions. Turn the screws on Zuffa, work together, and turn the screws on Zuffa to get the cut of the pay-per-view that you deserve, like boxers get, like millions and millions. And they wouldn't do it because who is Ed Soares? He's a guy who used to sell T-shirts. No disrespect to him. He doesn't have that kind of knowledge. He doesn't have a long-term plan. He's a guy like you and me. He has bills coming in today that he
So you're
wants to
saying
get
this
paid
isn't
today.
Jerry Maguire we're dealing with?
Yeah,
Show me
sure.
the money!
But Rob Macy is fighting for something bigger, and the trouble with managers in MMA is they have a very limited vision. Like a guy like Ken Pavia or Sherry Spencer, any of the or
Pavia, who's that? Who's that? Hasn't that name been
yeah,
erased from the histories?
like these guys can barely like stay afloat themselves, and they're so used to they don't have a vision, and they didn't even understand what to do 5 or 10 years ago. If they knew what they were doing,
Well, who
they
are the
would
big
have joined.
managers in MMA right now? You mentioned Ed Soares. He's got Anderson Silva. He's got Lyoto Machida. Does he have
They're
Vitor
they're
Belfort? No, Vitor Belfort's got his own wife, Joanna Prado. Like, who are the other big managers out there? AKA is
Zinkin
crazy about
Entertainment is AKA. So
and they've
Zinkin
got
has
Cain Velasquez and who else?
Then there's Malky, who's I guess
Malky Kawa.
oh
with
yeah.
Malky Kawa who has to have somebody
Wayne.
actually do the negotiating with the
Well, is
Fertitta.
Malky the manager of John Jones, or is Wayne Harriman? And then
Yeah.
you got a question of conflict of interest because besides Wayne's criminal background, hey, he's
We've all made mistakes, John.
we've all made mistakes, but he is a
I think we've all found ourselves in the middle of multi-million-dollar cocaine rings at one time or another. I mean,
yeah,
it's just
and confessed members of
another
organized
wacky mix-up.
mob mafia, and twice in 2 investigations of cocaine trafficking. That's a common
But
experience.
I heard that mafia was against drugs. I saw The Godfather, and Marlon Brando was pretty against that
Yes,
stuff.
but
So-
but is it? I guess is it how good of negotiator is a man that's been labeled time and time again in books and interviews as a good friend of the Fertittas and Dana White doing your
Lorenzo
negotiation for
said
you?
it was nice to meet you on the embedded video when they showed Harriman in his office. So there you go. Obviously,
Yeah. First time, yeah. But
Yeah.
no, that's. I'm just wondering how, if it's a good buddy to the owners and he works with RFA and who has a relationship. I mean, is his fiduciary responsibility totally to the fighter, or does he have other interests?
I've never heard of something like that. I can't believe someone would get themselves in a position where they've got a conflict of interest and they're not looking out for the fighters.
Yeah, there's no conflicts of interest in this sport, none.
Yeah.
That's
So,
for sure.
so we got the Malky Kawa situation and Wayne
Yeah.
Harriman, and who else is out there? I mean, who was the guy that used to manage Militech and Matt Hughes and Tim Sylvia?
Monty Cox.
Monty Cox. He's not a player anymore, is he?
He's got Will Brooks, but every time someone major makes Will Brooks from
exactly.
He had a dispute with Robbie Lawler though. He used to have Robbie Lawler, and Robbie didn't want to pay him some money, so I don't know if he still has him though.
I'm guessing the Robbie Lawler was the same as the Matt Hughes situation. I'm just guessing.
Once they got big, then they didn't want to pay Monty.
They signed a great new deal, and then some deal was signed with UFC, and it's like I don't need you anymore because the UFC just gave me this great deal.
Well, the UFC loves to negotiate. They get fighters alone in the locker room. They don't allow managers in the locker room, and they love to negotiate in the locker room after fights when they're passing out these fight night bonuses and these off the books bonuses. And then they negotiate these deals. Then they tell the guy, why should you pay your manager 10%? He wasn't even here when we cut this deal.
Yeah, well, I've heard this from a couple sources, so I'm guessing this is accurate. That for Matt Hughes is that when Bodog was around, Matt Hughes' contract was up, and Monty got a great, huge monster offer from Bodog. So he went to UFC, and made that offer to them, and they went directly to Hughes and said, well, we'll re-sign you. We can't pay you that amount, but we'll pay you like a 10-year deal, whatever, long-term deal. And then Hughes fired Monty because he negotiated the deal directly with the UFC.
Yeah, and so that puts managers in just a viciously weak position. We mentioned Ken Pavia. He's a guy who managed a bunch of mid-tier fighters. Then he gets named in this lawsuit when it was accused of sharing his UFC fighters' contracts with Bellator. Is that? Am I getting this correct?
That's right.
And that's essentially been it for Ken Pavia.
Yeah, he's been smuggling Russians into the Bellator cage ever since.
Now, we're not making allegations of human trafficking either. Now, this is all about
no.
There's no Albanians.
Yeah. So I don't know what he's gonna, if they cut back in the number of shows and not using as many Russians. I don't know what he's gonna do now.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just a tangled mess. But what are the fighters actually complaining about in this lawsuit? And do they have any valid points that the legal people you're talking to are saying, now this might be a case? Like, what is it that attracted the interest of these big time sharks, frankly, in the San Jose area?
Yeah, I'll say I think a lot of fans. It's interesting reading the comments because it's obvious a lot of fans don't quite understand the allegations. It's
amazing how many of our Bloody Elbow readers, for example, haven't finished law school yet. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say I understand it too well either. That's why I went and spoke to people that understand this stuff. The one thing is, when fans criticize that complaint and people think it's going to be thrown out, it's interesting to hear everybody that I've talked to really impressed by the complaint.
But there are some typos in there.
Yeah, but everyone I've talked to, professors of antitrust, class action, they're really impressed with that suit, the complaint. And I think fans
even though they got some fight dates wrong, and
they got fight dates, they didn't care about that. The interesting thing was the quotes from Dana and the Fertittas and these quotes, which fans.
It's funny how Dana doesn't do media scrums anymore.
Yeah, we should get to that in a little bit. We should
talk
about.
All right, well, go ahead.
But the suits, the complaint is people are missing that the complaint's intent is not to win the case. The complaint isn't the intent of the complaint is to get past dismissal phase, so they can go ahead and start investigating and pulling out information on disclosure. So on that stance, it's a very strong complaint, not to win the case, but to get past dismissal. And the complaint of the fighters, which I think people don't quite understand, it's not one element. It's not the contracts. It's not the anti-competitive.
Hey, they signed a deal. They signed a deal. They took a contract. What is this?
Well, that's huge when you're talking monopsony. If anybody argues with you, if you're talking to monopsony and anybody argues with you, well, they just signed the contract. If they didn't like it, they shouldn't sign it. That means they don't understand what monopsony is. They don't understand the discussion.
Very few people do. It's not even a word, John. The word's monopoly. Come on, what is this monopsony?
We'll just call it monopoly. Monopoly power, monopolization.
Explain the term monopsony.
The monopsony is the idea that there's only one buyer and a bunch of sellers. So that one buyer, the sellers have an item that they want to sell, in this case talent, MMA, elite MMA talent, and there's only one real buyer, they're saying, the UFC. Now, there's other buyers out there, World Series of Fighting and Bellator, so it's not a true 100%, yeah, they're not a true 100%, yeah, they're all over the place. There's a lot of options, but it's not a true monopsony in the sense they're the only real buyer. It's monopsony power. It's the market power. Is that they have such control over the market that they distort it. And a great explanation someone talked about is, imagine as a black hole. Normally, there's a thing called the network effect. UFC, when they bought Pride, they went from having 40% of the top fighters to 60, 70%. Then they bought Strikeforce up to 90%. Now they're up to like 95% of the top fighters. If you're a fighter, it makes sense to go to the UFC because there's a limit to how high you can rise the ranking. Look at Ben Askren. You go to the UFC and suddenly there's more attention because there's more top fighters and you get more prestige and all that stuff. So that's the network effect. That's normal. What they're arguing is because of the contract provisions, because of the way they pushed out competition, because of all these things they're doing, when you get in the UFC, there's no one outside the UFC. So sure, the UFC has network effect and you can gain value, but there's nowhere to compete against them because as soon as you're in the UFC, you're trapped, and as you gain value, you can't leave because they can have the tolling provisions to keep you in as long as they want because they have the championship clause. And because of all those things, no competitor can pop up, and so there's no outside forces to balance it out. That's the gist of that's the scheme they're arguing. That makes sense.
But Brian, like Nate Quarry had neck surgery, and Dana White covered it all out of his pocket. I mean, how can they turn around and bite the hand that's not just fed them, but taking care of him. I mean, ask Dan Miller and how they took care of his kid's surgery. And I mean, Dana White's just out there giving and giving and giving to these fighters and taking care. How can they be so ungrateful? Where does this come from?
Well, interesting thing with Nate is he talked about his management, the Ultimate Fighter contract, and his contract to fight Rich Franklin. He didn't really know anything about business. He was financially illiterate. No disrespect to him about what the metrics were on how much the UFC would make. So he got like just a few $1,000s for his title shot. And then later on, of course, over the years, some bitterness is going to come up and come to light. So is this a betrayal?
We should mention he got whored in that title shot. He got knocked out. I mean, how much does he want when he went out there and got punked? I mean,
and that's the thing, though. We expect, it's like in America. Everyone's told that they're going to be the CEO.
He did the standing plank, just.
Everyone's sold on the dream that they're going to be the CEO, and that's so we can get guys who are going to be janitors. Their UFC will string along all these contenders, and they know only one or two of them will be the champion or make some decent money, but they have to sell them on the dream, and their bodies get used up a little bit. So I think what Nate said is, if I'd been paid properly, I could have paid for my own surgery, and there's really not much that's done for these guys. When you look at the situations recently with Brian Bowles, and he was caught with meth.
And now you're blaming Dana White because the guy becomes a drug dealer?
What I'm saying is he's just one of those guys who's dying on the beach, he's just one of the guys who died trying to storm the castle. And
he's not dead. He is not dead, Brian. Another factually.
His career might be.
I'd say Brian Bowles' career is dead. It's too bad because he had a mean right hand, and I hear if you're looking to get some rails, that this guy can hook you up, but no more. That is no more. So I mean, yeah. Look, I think you're making the point for Dana, though. He's like, look at these scumbags. If I wasn't out here paying them, they'd be taking drugs, selling drugs, beating women. I mean, look, I'm civilizing these people. I'm providing for them. I'm taking care of them. What if Nate Quarry had all that money? Wouldn't he have just squandered it on gambling and meth? Like Dana, if Dana wasn't there. Oh, did I say squandering it on gambling?
You know what? You're kind of right about people and human nature. You look at the subprime mortgage crisis. Human nature is
that was caused by the government giving money to minorities. So let's be clear.
People are short-sighted, which is in the entertainment business, like in California. Why there are so many laws that help entertainers. There's Screen Actors Guild, and long-term contracts are seen as exploitative. Because the old Hollywood system. There's a lot of things that have to be considered.
Do you remember when the writers brought down Hollywood and had a strike and we didn't get any funds for days? What if the UFC has a union? Shouldn't fans be more afraid of a union than anything taking their funds away?
Yeah, I mean, John?
Serious question. Is this an open door to communism in sports?
First, I'm surprised anything's written anymore in Hollywood. I haven't seen a screenplay in a while. It's just It's just a comic book cover. We're making that. There's the story, the script. It's all there.
It's all there.
Yeah,
but don't
writer's strike.
Now
you got me depressed thinking about what happened after the writer's strike. It's been terrible since that date out here. I'll tell you that right now.
Has it really?
Oh, it's changed my whole life. Now I might cry at any minute. But get back It's funny. What's interesting is with the Reebok deal. First, people always, and that's another pet peeve. Besides, I shouldn't say pet peeve, but it's understandable. Is fans argue about the monopoly and monopolization argument, and they really don't comprehend it. I'm not saying I do. I at least call people that do know about it, but they also don't know about unions, and that's always thrown out as a solution. Oh, make a union when fighters can't make a union. They're independent contractors right now. They have to be relabeled. So, and I guess fans are selfish. They're worried that a union, which has been a benefit to every sport that's been involved with so far, as much as they've had labor problems. I still don't watch
baseball because of the 1994 baseball strike. I was winning my rotisserie league when they striked and canceled the World Series. That was it for me. Screw that game.
Come out to a Dodgers game. It's great to sit in the sun, have a beer.
And get beat up by Giants fans? Are you crazy? I've heard about the gang violence that goes on at these California sporting events.
Who's watching the game? That's what we're there for, the fights. It's better than a UFC event.
Are you following these lawsuits against Uber, where it looks
Yes.
like the definition of independent contractor is under attack, and the freedom of job creators to create jobs is under siege here because these onerous government regulations that make it such that if you employ somebody and pay them money to do a task and you tell them exactly how to do it and make them adhere to all these rules,
Right.
that then suddenly they're an employee instead of a free person who's free to cut their own deal. Like what kind of creeping
I
communism
don't.
is this?
You know what? Ever since the 14th Amendment was enacted, and we can't do indentured servitude. This country's gone downhill. I'm just telling
Well,
you.
we're not
That's
going to
fine.
get into that. That has to be here. But like
But yeah.
seriously, is the U.S. I mean, are these guys really independent contractors? If they can be told they have to wear a Reebok outfit, they can't wear the other. They can't have outside sponsorship deals.
I I don't know. I mean, we'll have to speak to. It'll be decided by a court if it ever gets to that
Is
point if
that
someone
part of
challenges
the
it.
current lawsuit, the
It's,
independent contractor?
that's not part of the lawsuit, but I'm sure it's interesting. Ever since the lawsuit, I'll say this one. Ever since that suit was filed, talking to fighters off the record at least, just calling them, and they still won't go on the record, but people are much more open about their complaints, what's going on, their problems. I mean, the double
Do
whammy
you
of the
ever feel
Reebok
like
deal.
fighters use up all of their bravery stepping into the cage to fight terrifying killers, and that's all they've got, and like they have no more bravery for things like going on the record or organizing a union after that?
That's part of it. Maybe I think the other issue is just how precarious the profession is. I mean, how the fighters are just they're not these guys aren't loaded except for the few guys making several million. Even the guys people are like, oh, he made 200,000 that fight after camps, after everything.
His net is usually like what, 40 grand on something like
Yeah,
that?
well, 200. Let's say he made 100 grand net afterwards. So he's got, but still, everybody has to pay taxes. But at the end of
70 grand.
at the end of the day, that's what 3-4 years to make that money. And when he's done fighting, when you talk to these guys, some of them barely can move. They have a massive amount of injuries and problems and aches and pains. They're not going to be able to hold a 9-to-5 job. A lot of them, and they don't have any resume
They're
either.
not going to be doing a lot of higher-end thought processes, some of these cats. Like Gary Goodridge is already in dementia. I'm hearing rumors about other fighters that I won't name that are some pretty surprising names that are already showing symptoms of dementia, and it's scary and sad. It's also the fight game. So, I mean, where do you think this thing is going? Like, what is the timing? What's the first step? Whether or not this case just gets flat dismissed? Has it already passed that threshold, or are they still fighting that fight?
No, that is decided. The first decision I think coming up in I got to check the calendar, but I think in May they're going to decide, or March or May they're going to decide if it goes to Nevada or heard in.
So that's the first step. Before there's not a dismiss or don't dismiss. There's the venue first.
I think right after that's the summary dismissal will be asked, and then there'll be other arguments for dismissal. We get through the dismissal phase, we'll start taking depositions, and then there'll be some
If this
evidence
case
presented.
gets moved to Nevada, how likely is it that it just goes away?
No, I think it still goes ahead. It's just the settlement phase. The argument's going to be that it's likely from everybody I talked to, it's going to get past dismissal phase. I think the odds were, I was given like 80-90% chance it gets past dismissal phase.
Even in Nevada?
Even Nevada. Class dismissal, class certification, I guess they think that's likely 70%, let's say, 70-80. If they get past those two and keep going forward, that's where it starts getting interesting, because if they start getting to discovery phase, that's when you look to have a settlement start coming. And if it's in NorCal, that settlement's going to be a lot higher than it is in Nevada, because I'm sure they're much more worried about what the judges are going to decide and allow in NorCal. And if you see a couple rulings go their way, then you'll see a much larger settlement. And I hope it goes to discovery phase. I don't, that's the only thing I want to get to. Just let's get to discovery phase.
Because and the magic of discovery phase is that people have to take these things they call depositions, wherein they sit in a little room like Bill Clinton had to do in the Monica Lewinsky days, in front of a camera with a lawyer and go through hours and hours of questions under oath.
And then they have to open their books, and they have to let them look through their books, and they have to go through their emails and look through what they said, and so be that's all we're asking for. That's all.
Are we a sports fan or a business voyeur, John? That's the question I've got to turn the tables on you. But that's neither here nor there. Brian, here's another angle. Is this going to encourage Zuffa to sell? Is Zuffa looking to sell? Are you hearing anything about this? Because it seems like the time would have been riper a few years back, but people have always thought that was the Fertitta's end game here, is build this thing up, blow it up, buy low, sell high. Is this a good time to get out?
I've heard rumors from a couple people. Like I've heard things. Nothing. Again, rumors just a rumor. So take it what it's worth. There's talk like, well, they could sell the promotion to Fox or whatever. Um, my own personal feeling, like I don't know who all these people who want to get in the MMA business are and want to lose money. I don't know why anyone would start the World Series of Fighting the way they did, or what Viacom's long-term plan with Bellator is. Like it just seems like a very tenuous position to hold, especially with the nature of the sport. But it is possible.
It's
You're
fairly
right.
easy to see for Viacom because they made a lot of money with the UFC on Spike, and they're just looking for tentpole programming that they can run on their network that they own and that doesn't get away from them. That's
That's
Yeah.
true, but like, are they really gonna have the opportunity to scale up? Like, to make a lot of money from Bellator to go big or go home, which is why they started doing pay-per-views. So who would
and
the
then quickly
potential?
stop doing pay-per-views.
Yeah, but who would the potential buyers be? Would it be like a television network? Who's out there that would buy the UFC? And how could they overlook like the problems that it's going through? Would that affect the price? Those are interesting questions. The other thing with the lawsuit is it changes the way everything is going to be done from now on. Maybe there's going to be a little bit more respect. Maybe Dana won't be around, dropping f-bombs on random fans on Twitter. Maybe our industry will get a little more professional.
I mean, is that what we're seeing? Like Dana White says it was because of all these media bottom feeders, and Keurig of MMA.tv nobly stepped up and said, that's me, boss. I've been bad. I've taken quotes out of context." And the definition of MMA of taking a quote out of context is writing down what the dude said and then publishing it. That's one of the many unforgivable sins of MMA media. But like, is that really the deal, or as Dana White stopped doing the scrums because he read the case filing too, and like how much of that stuff came out of Dana White media scrums?
I'm everybody's pretty positive that he stopped talking because of the lawsuit. And if I mean you just look at it, it's just all it is Dana White saying we're the NFL, we own the sport. There's no one else. So those obviously stop talking because of that. Why give the other people more ammunition? And who knows? There might be other cases in the future, other suits on other subjects, and they will be mining all of the stuff he said on that. He wants to be careful that they're now paranoid. Like, we do not need you talking about, if with
Is this the
CTA
end of
trauma.
the UFC glory days? I mean, that was one of the big appeal factors of the UFC. I mean, it used to be the sales pitch was, look, we're a real people sport. Our champions are approachable. They're just guys like you. That they're not big time NFL cokehead partying big money criminal guys. That Chuck Liddell's got his accounting degree. Matt Hughes is the salt of the earth. And there was this subtext also of white guy, white guy, white guy as the champions. Plus, then you had Dana White, who's just like you. He's cussing. He's laying it, telling it like it is, and suddenly he's not. And then they're like, hey, we're more drug tested than baseball or bicycling. This is a safe, clean sport. And boom, 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 drug test, failure after drug test failure. Is everything that the MMA boom was built on a lie? Are my affliction shirts not cool anymore? Is that what you're telling me?
What? No more Dana White. No more Condom Depot. It's the end of an era. That was
No more
the golden
Condom
era.
Depot.
The golden, that's when I know it was the golden age. Whenever rebroadcast, you see Condom Depot, I go, that was the golden age.
Those were the golden days. Oh well. And now where do you get your condom? I mean, it's like you're like, where do I find these things?
Yeah, I know. That's I mean, Guns and Ammo. What was the old ammo sponsor? I need ammo. I knew where to look. It was on Sean Shirk's ass. The ammo. That's I knew how to.
So, Brian, where do we go from here? What do you expect in the next quarter? Is it going to be a good news cycle for the next 90 days for the UFC, or a bad news cycle?
I think it'll be mixed. I mean, realistically, if you give the
I want
fans good
answers. I don't
fights,
want grays. I want blacks and whites.
all is going to be forgiven if Zuffa can produce some good fights or produce something. Even if John Jones comes back and fights somebody quickly, that's what they want. For
They're
all this
looking
shit.
at that like they're talking about that in May. They're talking about John Jones versus Anthony Rumble Johnson in May, which could
And
be
people are
huge.
excited, right? People are excited. That'll detract from the drug testing, from the lawsuit, from everything. It's always been about disrupting people's attention span. Before people get fixated and figure out the scam that's going on or any of the problems, give them something shiny to play with, and they'll run with it, like a cat and a ball of string.
Now,
That's how
what
I.
happens if Mayweather and Pacquiao sign a deal to fight, and they sign it this week? That fight happens in May. Does anybody care about John Jones versus anybody at that point?
I think the
Sure, sure.
Fourth of July show's got a new headliner.
Yeah. I mean,
It'll be that old Frank Mir. What was the injury Frank Mir had to get on the UFC 100? It'll be just like that. It'll be some convenient injury coming down the pipe.
I see, because it looks like right now the big July 4th show is going to be Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo. Do y'all see that as is that a marquee event, Brian?
Possibly. I don't know. Like we're talking about Conor McGregor, but like he's yet to like stand on his own and
Well, his
really
ratings were awesome on Fox Sports 1. I mean, of course,
as
they
a, as
pushed
a
it more during
pay-per-view
football.
draw. As a pay-per-view draw against.
He hasn't done a pay-per-view, but.
Yeah, and that's the thing against a guy like Liddell or even Tito Ortiz. Like what will he? Then you can say, all right, he's on his way. He hasn't arrived, and that's the job.
Well, then there's the little factor of unless he's Muhammad Ali knocking out Sonny Liston against all odds, like the odds makers are going to be brutally in favor of Jose Aldo in that fight.
Yeah, I think they could sell. I mean, even if they don't go gangbuster on pay-per-view, this could be a huge hit though, because let's say it sells 300,000-400,000. That's still a lot of money. And if you throw in that it's a big TV hit in Brazil and a big TV hit in Europe,
don't forget the kickback from the Brazil City Council.
What? Are we making more crazy allegations? Because we're just
no. They'll tap into a couple million from like a Brazil municipality to bring events in, right?
Well, that's just called competing. You know, that city's competing honestly to draw business to their communities. There's nothing more all-American than that. Nothing more. That's what the whole Alabama and Tennessee economies are built on, and Texas, the Texas Miracle. All right, John, what do you think? Is the UFC, are they on the upswing, downswing? Have they turned it all around, or are the bad times ahead? Wolf at the door.
I honestly don't know, but I'll take the.
Look in your crystal ball, dude.
Okay, hold on. Using some psychic ability here, thinking, looking, visualizing. I think the sport closes doors in 2 weeks. No, it's a doomed sport. No, I think we've entered a phase. They've made it what they wanted to kind of. In other words, it's funny. They've made it into a sport, thinking that gives it more protection. I think in the U.S. I think they're finally hitting them. People like spectacle, so they're trying now to pivot back to spectacle. So it's going to be
the top athletes in the world. They just signed CM Punk. I hear he's the champion of one of the world's most popular wrestling organizations.
He's got to be good. Wrestling's a base in MMA, so you know the man's got it.
He's got the promo skills and the mic skills you need. So yeah, I mean they've made the sudden squealing pivot back to spectacle and hopefully they can strike the right balance. It's very interesting times to be a fan of the Fertittas and Dana White. And ultimately, that's what I admire what these guys are doing. I don't approve of every action they take, but in the end, I'm just a little pilot shark swimming around eating their scraps. And I want, if they've screwed up, if they've done something wrong, bad business practices, by all means, pay the fighters. At the same time, these are the guys who made the sport in America, and at this point, the only people flying the flag for the sport worldwide, pretty much. I mean,
yeah. I'll criticize them all the time. I have a lot of complaints and criticism. I don't like stuff they do. I don't like their business practices. But at the same time, I don't think these individuals are particularly worse than other people. They just have more power than other people because there's other promoters I think are much worse than they are. But other promoters don't have.
But Dave Finkelstein would beg to differ.
Yeah, but other promoters don't have the power they have and the control. So anything they do affects 100 people compared to, hey, a crackhead robbing a liquor store might be a much worse person than a guy on Wall Street, but the guy on Wall Street's robbing 1 million people.
Yeah, and actually, legally.
I retract that. That's a little. That suggests I'm saying something criminal. So cut that out. We can edit this, right?
We'll edit this all together and fix it all up. All right, guys. Any final thoughts, Brian?
Just that this lawsuit is a way for the fighters to hit back and even if they settle, they'll still get some more rights. It's not really about the lawsuit or the case. They have virtually no power by themselves. It's like these American Idol contestants. They'll do anything, the fighters, to make themselves a star and improve their position. But once they've made the deal with the devil, there's almost no way back. This is a positive thing for the sport. It's a positive thing for the Fertittas too. They'll come around and realize that maybe one day. And we can have like something like boxing where there still are big fights even in a niche sport. We can still have an exciting industry and have people get paid and have some stability. Well, they got to work through the growing pains, and they got to give people their rights back.
All right, and John, your final thoughts.
The firms are in it for the money. That's true, but I think people are missing that some of the fighters and Rob Macy, especially some of these guys, Carlos Newton, they're true believers. They believe they're going to change the sport. They want to fix the sport, and at the very least, it seems that there's some sort of pushback. So even if this gets thrown out, nothing gets settled, I think we're at least moving in a direction where maybe fighters are starting to stand up and take some control of the sport, get some their value back, protect themselves. So it's hopefully it's a net positive, or hopefully it kills the sport. We can go on to other stuff. We don't waste our time on this stuff anymore.
Gallows humor. Well, thanks, guys. Again, Brian D'Souza, author of, what's your book title?
Pound for Pound: The Modern Gladiators of Mixed Martial Arts.
And I gotta say, it's the best book about the business of MMA I've ever read. And John Nash, Bloody Elbows.
And I will say that I just read it again, and it's better than I remembered it.
Oh, excellent.
I thought it was a spy mystery originally. So, but
and are you gonna have any big scoops on Bloody Elbow anytime soon?
I don't know what scoops, but I got a couple interesting stories coming up. So I don't want to.
All right. We'll look out for that.
Look forward to those. Yeah, I haven't. I guess I have to write them now.
Yes, you do. You'll have to get to work. You've got one story you owe me, actually, that you've given me in sort of rough form. You need to hack that into shape. So.
I gotta hack that, and I got some. I'm going to go back to some old history stuff too. So
excellent. All right. Well, we like looking back at the history of the sport. So, anyway, give us a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to MMA Nation on YouTube. That's MMANation.com on YouTube. Read us on BloodyElbow.com. Follow us on Twitter. What are your Twitter handles, Brian? You are
at Thracian_books.
Terrible Twitter handle. We'll fix that for you later. John, what's your terrible Twitter handle?
At Hey Not the Face.
At Hey Not the Face. You guys, we need to get a corporate branding course for both of you guys. I'm at Kid Nate. Simple, easy to remember, easy to spell.
I'm telling you, Hey Not the Face. That's it'll be my.
Some other Brian D'Souza.
Just remember that,
Brian D'Souza.
All right, guys. Thanks again, and we're gonna have a vivisection for the Glory event that's coming up, and then next week we'll be back with all the usual fixins as we get ready for whatever the next UFC is. We'll have Knuckle Up, Care Don't Care, vivisection, etc. Adios, MMA aficionados. This is Kid Nate. Thanks for joining us.